So in this video, we'll look at Pandoc. Pandoc is a universal document converter. So that means that if you have a file format of one type, let's say Markdown, and you want to convert it to another type, which let's, for example, some kind of Word document or PDF, you can use Pandoc to do that. So the first thing you're going to need is to install Pandoc. So you can do that at pandoc.org. And if you click the installing tab at the top, you can then click download the latest installer. From there, you'll select the file that corresponds to your operating system. For example, you might pick a package file if you're on Mac. You might pick a zip file on Windows, and that would contain the executable. So for example, I'm going to pick this .zip file, and then I'll drag it to my desktop. So it's downloading now, and then I'm going to select this downloaded file, drag it to my desktop. Now that it's on my desktop, I can double click on it, and then I can drag the folder that's inside to my desktop. Now that it's on my desktop, I can just run the executable and it will install Pandoc. Once you've installed Pandoc, the next thing you'll want to do is to open up a terminal. If you've never opened up a terminal before, one way you could do that if you're on Mac is to hit the command button, then spacebar, and then type terminal. If you're on Windows, you can go down to the search bar, which is in the bottom left usually, and type in CMD. Once you've installed Pandoc and opened up your terminal, you'll need to check to see if Pandoc is installed. So for example, I'm in my terminal here and I'll type in pandoc -- version and it will show that Pandoc has been installed. I'm going to clear my terminal. If you're on Mac, you can likely type clear and it will clear your terminal. If you are on Windows and are just running the command prompt, you'll type CLS and then it will clear the terminal. The next thing that we'll need to do is to have a file to convert. So on my desktop, I'm going to create a folder, and in that folder, I'll call the folder test. And in that folder, I'm going to open it up and create a plain text file. So I'm going to use a text document and I'm just going to name it sample.txt. Here is my sample.txt file and I'll just type a couple things. So I'll say this is a sample file. It contains some text. I'm going to go ahead and save this file and close the notepad editor. Now I'm going to go back to my terminal and I'm going to actually try to convert this file to a different format. However, before I do that, it is helpful to navigate the terminal to the directory in which the file is found. So I can do this using various cd commands. So I could say cd, since I know my file is on my desktop, I'll put cd desktop, and then I'll put cd test -- so this is the folder that is found on my desktop. Once you've navigated the terminal to the directory in which the file is found, you can kind of check this by typing ls and you'll see the ls is going to list all the files in this folder and we have sample.txt. Now that everything is set up, let's look at a simple example. In this example, we'll convert our sample.txt file to an HTML file. What we'll do is type in the terminal pandoc sample.txt -o sample.html. So I'm back in my terminal and I'm going to type pandoc because I want to use this pandoc tool. And then I want to type sample.txt, which is the file I want to input into Pandoc. So it's the one I want to convert. I'll put -o because I want to output to a file. And the kind of file that I want to output to is HTML. So I'll write sample.html. I'll hit enter, and this should create a new file, sample.html. If I type ls, it should list this, and you should see sample.html. To confirm all this, let's take a look at our test folder, and now you should see that there is this sample.html file. If I double click on it, I could see this is a sample file. It contains some text. So congratulations, that's our first conversion. Let's look at some more. One thing to note about this conversion is you'll notice that there's no styling to it. There's no margin. And in order to create a kind of standalone file, we're going to need to make a modification to our command. In order to indicate that we want a standalone document type, we'll need to use this option -s. So let's take a look at what this might look like. we'll repeat our previous command, and you can press up to cycle through the previous commands you've written in the terminal. And I'm going to move over in my command, and before the -o, type -s. And now I'm going to hit enter again. And this is going to create a new sample.html file. So I'm back in my test folder, and I double click, and I see, hey, look, this actually applies a kind of margin here. There should be metadata added. If I had bolding in there, it would indicate that as well. And so we can compare this to the previous one by looking at the other tab. Notice that there's no margin here, but there's been a margin applied here. The next thing I want to point out is that you can actually concatenate or combine files together into a single output file. For the purpose of illustration, I'm going to create all three of these files in the terminal. And so I'm going to clear my terminal, and then in my test directory still, I'll write touch, and then I'm going to write intro.txt, body.txt, and then conclusion.txt. And if I type ls now, I should have these new files. And I'm going to open up each one of them. Now, there's a way to do this in the terminal, but to keep things simple, let's go to the intro file. So I've opened up our intro file, and let's write, this is an introduction. This ends our intro file. I'm going to save it, and then I'm going to open up the body. Here is the body file. It contains the body text. I'll go ahead and save that. And then the conclusion. This is the conclusion. This ends the file. All right, I have my three .txt files, and I am going to combine them all together into a single file. And I want it to be this sample.html file. So back in my terminal, I'm going to clear everything out. I will type Pandoc, and then I want to combine all three of them together. And so I'll just write the names of each one. So intro.txt, body.txt, and then conclusion.txt. I want to create a standalone document, and then I want to output a HTML file that I'm calling sample.html. And I'll hit enter. I'll get my warning like usual, and then I will go back to my folder and double click on this sample.html file. And so now you see I've combined all three of these files together into an HTML file. So here's an exercise for you to try out. Take two plain text files, then combine them together using Pandoc to create an ODT file or .x file, or some file that you can modify the styling a little bit. Make some styling changes to this .odt or .x file or whatever. So add some bolding, italicization, maybe include a heading, and then convert that .odt file into an HTML file, and then open it in a browser.
You know this will be on the test.
So hopefully you were able to do this. I am going to illustrate how I would do this. I would start in the terminal again, and then I'm going to clear my terminal here, and I'm going to create two files. So I want two .txt files. So I'll say touch, and I'll call f1.txt and f2.txt. So I'm going to create these two files, and let's add some content to these files. So let's say the first one is, maybe I have a list here, and so it's, let me make this a little larger. So let's say I have a list which is milk, groceries, and I don't know, a pumpkin. And so I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then I am going to open up my second TXT file. And then I have another list. Let's say this is things I need to do, which is take out trash and then clean out garage. And then I'm going to go ahead and save this and close all of them. So the next step in our process is, now that we have these two plain text files, is to convert them into an ODT or .x file. So I'll go ahead and do this by writing Pandoc f1.txt, f2.txt. I want to create a standalone document, so -s, and then I want to output it to, let's just call it combined.txt. .odt. So I'm going to use the ODT rather than .x. So this should work. And if I go back to my test folder, which is right here, I have this combined, .odt. So let me open this up. And I see I have my list here. And so it's combined the items together into a list. And so let me go ahead and add a heading to this whole thing. So I'll just say grocery list. And then I'm going to add something like add a heading to it. So let's put heading 1 here. And then let's say this is our chores. Let's also add this as a heading. Let's just make it heading 2. And let's bold. We don't want groceries on our groceries list. So let's put eggs and let's bold that. And then let's italicize trash. Okay, so we have headings applied and then we have bolding and italicization. So let's go ahead and save all this and close the document. And then our last step, if you can remember, is to convert it to an HTML file. So again, we'll go back to Pandoc and we'll say Pandoc. We want to take our combined .odt file, create a standalone document, and then output, let's just say this is our to-do.html. And I'll hit enter. And we can go back to our folder and take a look. Let's open up the to-do.html. And then you see we have our ODT file converted to HTML. The next feature to look at in Pandoc involves the use of variables when files are converted from one type to another. That is, when we use the standalone option in Pandoc, what is applied is a template, and we can use variables to modify certain aspects of how that template is applied or used. So there are two main types of variables. One are metadata variables and the other are template or style variables. So the metadata variables are indicated by using a -m, and these do two things. The first thing that they can do is modify how the conversion works so that when the template is applied, it will affect how certain documents are converted. These typically involve the title, author, date, and subtitle, but can include other things like whether or not there's an abstract or keywords or subject. But one thing that they also do is sometimes they won't affect the styling, but they'll just affect what metadata is added to the document type. In our example, we're going to convert certain files to PDFs. And so in order to do this, you need some kind of LaTeX or tech engine installed. In Mac, the typical option is to use MacTeX, and another option is to use MikTeX. I'll put links in the description below, so you'll need to download those. If you don't want to do this, then you can kind of work through this by converting one file type to another file type that is not PDF. So for example, let's say I had a syllabus and this was a markdown file and I wanted to convert it to a PDF. So we could use the usual command that we've been working with, but we can also add additional metadata by using the -m, specifying some parameter or keyword like title, and then specifying the title's value. Similarly, if we wanted to add an author, we could use -m to indicate that we're using a metadata variable. We can write the word author, the keyword, and then write the name of the author in quotes. So we could say Lane, here is the author. And if we wanted to specify the date, then we would use -m and then date and then the value of that date. So let's take a look at what this might look like. So the first thing that we need to do is to actually create a sample syllabus. So I'll do that relatively quickly here. I'll go into and create just a simple text document. I'm going to name it as a markdown file. So we'll call this syllabus, and I'm going to open up this markdown file. And so now let me create my syllabus. So I'll give it a heading. So this would be, let's say, the course description. And then let's say this is the course description. Maybe we have a grading scheme. Let's say it's a list. A 90 and up. B is 80 and up. And then let's just, F is 60 and below. And then let's add one more. Let's say course policies. Here is a policy. Let's add two more actually. Policy on grading. This is the policy on grading. And here is policy on lateness. This is the policy on lateness. Okay, so we have our syllabus here. And if we were to convert it in Pandoc, let's clear this out. We could write Pandoc and then write the name of our file, which would be syllabus.md. And then we'll indicate that we want to convert it to a PDF as a standalone document. So -s, -o, and then syllabus.pdf. And if we'll get a warning, if we go to our folder here, we can open this up and we'll see that we have a PDF of our syllabus. But one thing that we mentioned that we wanted to do was to add some additional information. For example, title, the author, and then the date. So let's add that in our command. So I'm going to press up to bring back this command. And now I'm going to set various metadata variables. So I'll put -m, and then I'll write the author. Let's just say the author is Lane, PhD. We wanted to put a title. So let's make the title Logic Syllabus. And then we wanted to specify a date, which we'll put -m to indicate it's a metadata variable, and then put date. And then the date is 6/25/25. One thing I'll notice is that when I went to the title, I did not include the metadata variable. So I will go back and put uppercase M, and everything looks good here. I'll rerun this. But before I do, I need to close this PDF here that I created. Otherwise it won't work. So now let me run this command, and I'll go back to my test folder, open up the PDF again. And what we should have here is we have a title, which is a metadata variable, but it gets added in the construction of the PDF. We have the author, and then we also have the date involved. So you see that by adding various metadata variables, we'll add this to the file metadata itself, but will also sometimes influence the styling in converting from one file type to another. In addition to metadata variables, which sometimes in fact affect the styling and the metadata, there are just styling variables which will affect how the document is styled. So one thing that we might want to do with our syllabus, let me open this back up, is we might say to ourselves, these margins are rather wide. So let's make them very narrow because we plan on printing this syllabus and we want to save as much space as possible. So I will close this syllabus out, and we can set some styling variables using -V, and then I'm going to specify the geometry of the document. Put equals, and I want to specify the margin, and I want to make it a 1/2" margin. So going back to the terminal, I'm going to press up to bring back my command, and then I just want to add one thing, which is the geometry. So I'll put uppercase V, geometry equals margin equals 0.5 inches. So this 1/2 inch margin. I will hit enter again, making sure my PDF is closed. And I'll go back to my syllabus. And if I open it back up, we can see that the margin on this document is very small right there. In addition to the margin, we may want to, let's say, color various links in our document. Right now, our syllabus doesn't have any links, so let's go ahead and add some. So if I go back to the syllabus here, let's add some links. The first thing I could do is add a link to some part of the document. So I could say policy on lateness. I'll hit the pound symbol, and then I want to select the policy on lateness. And then I'll create one more, which is policy on grading. Now I realize this is out of order, but here are policy on grading. I think that's right. Yes, that should be right. And then let's make an external link let's just say Google, and we'll put www.google.com. And I'll go ahead and save all this. And the next thing that I want to do is go back to Pandoc, and I'm going to close my PDF and run the same command, but this time I want to specify the fact that I want to have links that are colored. So I'll write hyphen uppercase V and then put color links equals true. And let me look at my command one more time. So I want the links color to be magenta, and then I want URL colors to be magenta as well. So let's go back to our command prompt and type hyphen V, and I want my link color to equal magenta, and then I want hyphen V and URL color to equal magenta as well. Actually, let's make it different. Let's make it blue. So now when we rerun this command, we get our usual warning, and I'm going to open up the syllabus, and I have my URL color, my link to Google as blue, and these internal links as pink. So you see, by using these metadata and template variables, we can influence how the conversion process is performed. One thing to notice is that our commands are getting quite long, and it is kind of tedious to write out all of these metadata variables. In addition, we might want to use a lot of the styling that we use on multiple files. So one way we can work with Pandoc is to create a separate file called a YAML file. And then we can specify the various parameters that we would normally put in the command in this YAML file. So here at the top, we have our command, which is rather lengthy. And so what instead we'll do is put all that information in a YAML file. So what I'm going to do is go back to my test folder, and then I am going to create a file. I'm going to make it a text document, and I will call it syllabus.yaml. Then I'm going to open up this syllabus.yaml. Normally I would open this up with a code editor, but just to keep things simple, I'm just going to open it up in Notepad. And so what you could do here is just to input all the information that you put in your command into this YAML file. So you could specify the author. The author here is Lane, PhD. You could specify the date. Our date is 6/25/25, and so forth. So rather than writing all that out, I'm just going to paste all the information here. So we have title, we have the author with there's a colon separating, we have the date. We specify our margin. So let's change our margin to 1 inch. We colored our links. We made that true. And then we specified a link color and a URL color. Let's make the URL color blue. So now that we have all this information in our YAML file, what we need to do is in our command, refer to that YAML file. And for that, we'll use this flag or option --metadata -file, and then refer to our syllabus.yaml file. So I'm back in my terminal, and now I want to run Pandoc, but I want to refer to that YAML file. So I'll type Pandoc syllabus.markdown, and then I want --metadata -file equals syllabus.yaml. So that is the file, that YAML file that contained all the keywords and values that we normally put in the command. Then I want to create a standalone document that outputs to a PDF. So syllabus.pdf. I hit enter. I get my usual warning. And so we should have a PDF that looks pretty similar to the PDF that we just created. So let's open this up. And yeah, the only change that we've made here is the fact that I think we added another title here, but we also increased the margin sizes over here. And I guess we changed the date to 6/23 instead of 6/25. So rather than typing in all the metadata and styling variables into the command itself, you can simply use this metadata file command and a YAML file to do all that work. So let's add some additional information to our YAML file. Specifically, we'll add a table of contents. You can specify a number of things about the table of contents in terms of like how it looks, terms of the depth. But for our purposes, we're just going to, one, number the sections of the table of contents, and then actually add the table of contents. So if we go back to our PDF, notice that our section titles are not numbered. So we're going to add some numbering to this. And then at the top of our document here, we're also going to include a table of contents. Notice that none of this is in the original Markdown file. We do not have a table of contents here. So we're adding that in the process of converting the file. So the thing that we'll need to take a look at is our YAML file. And let's say, I'm going to put a £sign here as a comment and just say table of contents. So then I'll write TOC and I'll say that this is true. And then the other thing I want to do is number sections, and then I want to make that true as well. So I'll go ahead and save this YAML file, and I'll go back to Pandoc, and I'll just rerun the command that we just ran. So I will rerun it, but since I did not close the PDF, it won't work. So I'm going to go ahead and rerun it one more time with the PDF closed. I get my usual warning, and I'm going to open up the syllabus. And if we did everything right, we should have a table of contents. And so see, we have this table of contents here at the top of the page. And if we click on it, these links will take us to the different parts of the syllabus. So one thing to know about the use of YAML file is in some cases, in some conversions, it won't work as expected. So if we're going to convert our Markdown file to HTML, we would think that using the table of contents and specifying it as true in the YAML file would actually produce a table of contents in our HTML file, but it doesn't actually do this. In some conversions, all that the YAML file will do, if you say that there should be a table of contents, is just specify a place for it, but it actually won't construct the table of contents. So we actually, in some cases, we need to tell Pandoc to construct this table of contents. So let me illustrate that really quickly. We just saw how if you used the YAML file and said that the table of contents should be true, it would create the table of contents. But let's do this for a conversion to HTML. So if we, instead of creating a PDF, we create a HTML and we open up the HTML file, you'll see that while we have our title, we have the author, and we have the date, we do not have the table of contents. So in that case, if the conversion normally wouldn't auto-create a table of contents, we just need to add one more command. Namely, we need to add the command --TOC, and this should create a table of contents in the HTML conversion. So if we hit enter, and we go back to our browser and refresh, now we see we have this table of contents at the top of the page. Let's add one more thing to our YAML file. Namely, we'll add a header, and in this header, we'll have let's add one more thing to our YAML file. Namely, we'll add a header with page numbers to our creation of a PDF file. If you're converting to PDF, then you'll want to use LaTeX commands to create this header or footer. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these commands here and then go to my YAML file and paste them in. So what I'm doing here is including a LaTeX package, and I am making sure that there is nothing actually in the header already. And then I'm specifying the left side of the page of the header to contain the words logic syllabus, and then the right side of the page of the header to include the page number. And then I'm including a line underneath both of those. So the sort of bottom of the header should have a line there. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now, in order to get this to work, I need to make my document a little bit larger. So I'm going to copy and paste some of this text and save it because I need it to actually span 2 pages. And I can rerun the command, which is again, taking that markdown file, using the YAML file, and then turning it into a PDF. So I am going to create this standalone. I actually do not need this table of contents. And so when I rerun it, this should create a PDF. So let's go over to my files, open up the PDF, and you can see that I have this 2-page PDF. It contains this table of contents, but the part that we added here was this header which on the left-hand side says logic syllabus, and on the right-hand side has the page number. The last thing I want to look at involves templating. When you use a standalone option or this -s when doing Pandoc conversions, what is applied in the conversion is a template. And you can modify the default templates or make your own template. So if you want the conversion to always include some text or include text based upon certain conditions, you can create a template that whenever you do the conversion, it will use that your own personal template to make the file output in the way that you like. So in order to look at certain templates, you can write the command pandoc-d HTML. And so let's go to our terminal again and clear it out and write pandoc-d HTML to see what the template looks like. So you'll see it'll spit out a bunch of text here. And what you can do is modify or add to this template. And then refer to the template. So when you do your conversions, it will use your modified template. So let's look at a really basic modification to this template and do a conversion with our modified template. So what we're going to do is to just add some text at the bottom of every document. So the way we'll do this is we're just going to add a little copyright 2025 serial experiments to every conversion that we do. Now, to create a new template, we're going to need to do two things. The first thing that we're going to do is to create a new file, and we'll call it template. And then the extension will be whatever format you're converting into. So since we are going to convert into HTML, we're going to create a template, which will be HTML_template.html. So let's create that. So I'm going to go back into my folder here, create a new file. I will create HTML_template.html. Except, yes, I want to change this. The next thing I need to do is to go back into my terminal and select all of this text, the entire template, because I don't want to create my template from scratch. I just want to modify the existing template. So I'm going to copy this and go to my file, which is HTML template.html. And then I'm going to open this up in Notepad and paste it in. Okay, so the template specifies how the information from one document type, as well as any kind of parameters that you've added, should be applied to in the conversion. And in our case, what we want to do is to go to where the body is, and we're going to include our text after this body. So for that, we want to add this copyright. So I'm just going to copy this text and then add it after the $sign body. So this is where we want to add it right here if you're following along. So I'm going to go back into my plain text, and right after this body, I will hit paste it in. And so now it should include in every conversion this copyright 2025 serial experiments. So I'll save this. So now when I do the conversion, I want to not only take the syllabus and my YAML file, but I also want to apply this specific template. And in order to do this, I'm going to need the -- template, and then I'll specify the path or the file name of the template. I'm back in my terminal. Let me clear everything out. And the command that I want to run is pandoc syllabus.markdown. So I want to take that markdown file. I want to use the YAML file. So I'll put equals syllabus.yaml. And then I want to apply the template. The flag that we need is --template. So I'll put --template equals HTML_template.html. Then I want to create a standalone document that outputs to, what should we call this? New syllabus.html. And if I run this, it should work. Let's take a look in our files, and we have new syllabus.html. And if we did everything right with respect to the modification of the template, we should have our copyright at the bottom. So on scrolling down, we see here we have copyright 2025 serial experiments. Now I'll show you one more thing with respect to templating, that you can actually use various variables, conditionals, loops, and so forth to create your templates. And so for example, I have here that if we have the author, so if there's an author specified with the document, and if there is a date, then we should print out this file was created by the name of the author. So whatever value is associated with this variable on that specific date. If there is an author, but no date, it'll write this file was created by the author. And then it will end this conditional and says, if there is no author, but there is a date, then it will write out this file was created on the value of the date. And I'll get this information from the YAML file. And if there's neither one, neither an author or a date, then nothing will happen. So let's take this and copy it and add it to our template. So here we are back in our template, and I am going to, below this copyright 2025 serial experiments, I'm going to include this new command. So again, we have, if there's an author and a date, then it'll print out the value of the author and the date. Otherwise, it will just print out the value of the author. And if there's no author, then it'll print out the value of the date. So I'm going to save the template, and I'm going to go back to my terminal, and I'm going to just rerun the command that I just ran. I go ahead and run it. We should have both an author and a date because our YAML file includes both of them. So if we refresh the page, yes, this file was created by Lane on such and such date. Now let's just to see if this works correctly, go to our syllabus YAML file, and we'll exclude, let's just say we'll exclude the author. So I'm going to comment that out. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then back to my terminal, and then rerun this entire thing. So I reran it. I'm going to go to my logic syllabus and in the browser, and then refresh. And you see that it changes to this file was created on 6/23/25. To conclude everything, here's a little exercise. What you should try to do is just to create a plain text file, so a .txt file with some text. Create a YAML file with a title, subtitle, and some keyword parameters. And then finally, create an HTML template file from the default file that writes each of these parameters on their own lines, assuming they exist. So give that a shot. Okay, let's try this out. So we want to create a text file with some text. This is simple enough. We should go to our folder and let's just create a new file, a plain text file, and let's call it exercise1.txt. Open up this exercise file, and then let's include some text here. Here is some text. It is a part of exercise 1. I hope I am doing this correctly. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and that part is done. Next, I want to create a YAML file with a title, subtitle, and keywords. So let's do that next. Let's go back to our folder, create a new file, a plain text document, and we'll call this exercise1.yaml, and let's delete the txt. And let me find the exercise.1 YAML file, and I want to open this up with Notepad. So what do we need? Let's take a look again. We need the title, subtitle, and keywords. So we want a title. Let's just call it exercise 1. Subtitle, let's just call it a Pandoc exercise. And then keywords, let's specify the keywords as Pandoc and conversion. So let's save all that and we'll close it. Next, we need to create an HTML template file that writes each one of these parameters on their own lines if they exist. So it doesn't specify where we need to put them, we just need to include it somewhere. So to do that, if you recall correctly, we'll go back to the terminal. Let's clear everything out. And then we'll write Pandoc-D. And then since we want to create an HTML template, we would write HTML. If you wanted a different format, you would write something like Markdown, and it would show you the format for Markdown, or LaTeX. That would be another example. So if we type LaTeX, it gives us the format for LaTeX. But in our case, we just want the HTML template. So let's go ahead and copy all of this. And we want to create a template file. So we'll go to our test folder again, new, and I'm just going to create a plain text document, and I want to call it exercise template.html. I want to save this and open this exercise template.html with Notepad. And I'm just going to paste everything in. So now what I want to do is, if I go back to the instructions here, I want to write in each one of these parameters, assuming they exist. So to do that, let's do it before the body, but after the navigation. And we'll use the $ if, and then we want title, and then close $. So if there is a title, then what we want to do is create a p tag and say something like the title of this document is, and then we can get the value of that title by using $, title and close $, and then close the p tag. We'll also specify, and then we want to close out this conditional, so we can write end if. The next thing we want to do is a subtitle. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it in and change it to subtitle. So if there's a subtitle, then we want the content of that subtitle. And let's change this from the title of the document is to the subtitle is. And then finally, we want keywords. So I'm just going to copy and paste this again. So if there's keywords, let's just change this to the keywords are, and then we want to write keywords. So I'm going to go ahead and save all this and now go back to the terminal. So I'm going to clear out this terminal and write Pandoc, and we want to convert our exercise1.txt file. We want to use a metadata file, and that metadata file is exercise1.yaml. And then we want to apply a template, and our template was called exercise template.html. Finally, we want to create a standalone document and output to, let's call it exercise web.html. We run the file, and when we go to take a look at exercise web, we'll double click it. And so now we can see that in converting the file, it includes the text from the file itself. But whenever we apply this to a document, it will also include this additional information. So hopefully this helps give you an overview of how to use Pandoc and some of its major features. Of course, if you want to know how to use more advanced features, I would definitely take a look at the documentation at pandoc.org.
Boy, whatever gave you the idea to buy a computer anyway?
Because they said it was easy.
All right, I'll explain it from the beginning once more.
Okay.